Welcome to my show, When Everyone Wins, where a key goal I have for you is shifting from power over and under to power within and between. I'm your host, Judy Ryan. In each episode, I'll share my knowledge from decades in workplace culture transformation and leadership development as the founder and CEO of LifeWorks Systems. I'll help you build trust and emotional and social intelligence. My show, When Everyone Wins, is about creating a life you love and helping others do the same. Everybody, I'm so happy to be doing this episode on being hyper-adaptive. It's essential for win-win. So today we're going to be exploring this new phrase, the hyper-adaptive organization. The guest I'm having on today is Melissa Reeve, who actually coined this phrase, and it's the central focus of her new book called Hyperadaptive: Rewiring the Organization to Become an AI Native Enterprise. I might have struck a little fear in some of you if you're a little nervous about this whole AI thing and what the heck is hyperadaptive. So with 80% of artificial intelligence initiatives failing to deliver on their promise, Melissa steps in to give leaders a practical framework. She defines a hyper-adaptive organization as one that rewires its structures, its processes, and its capabilities to integrate AI and other technologies effectively, allowing them to sense, respond, and evolve at the speed of AI. And I like to add that a hyper-adaptive organization must allow support of AI in sensing, responding to, and evolving at the speed of the consciously evolved people. So we all need to be hyper-adaptive back and forth. So hyper-adaptive organizations require hyper-adaptive human beings. Yet people often fear change and adaptation. This is why it's important to recognize that not only do projects fail, but individuals and teams fail to experience the success and the fulfillment that's possible. That's why understanding what it means to be hyper-adaptive, especially at this time, is so important. As Meredith Grey says in Grey's Anatomy, we either adapt to change or we get left behind. So we don't want any of you to get left behind. So with this in mind, I'm proud and excited to tell you more about my wicked smart guests today. And we're going to try to make sure we don't make things so jargony that you guys can't understand them. But this is a wicked smart guest today, Melissa Reeve. Let me just tell you a little bit more about her. She's the founder of the Hyperadaptive Solutions, her organization, and the creator of her book, Hyperadaptive: Rewiring the Organization to Become AI Native, in which she describes her hyperadaptive model. She brings together process excellence, systems thinking, and the human side of AI integration to help the leaders reimagine how their organizations learn and adapt. I would also add the followers. Prior to leaning into AI, Melissa spent 25 years as an executive and agile thought leader, which led to her pioneering work in agile marketing and her role as the first VP of marketing at Scaled Agile, which helps enterprises adopt agile and lean at scale. She lives in Boulder, Colorado with her husband, her dogs and chickens, and where she enjoys hiking and gardening. Welcome, Melissa.
Thank you so much, Judy. What a wonderful introduction. Thanks so much for having me on the show. And I'm just so looking forward to this conversation.
Same too. I feel like we are truly like-minded, like-hearted in many ways. So hopefully we can pull our audience into also realizing how like-minded and like-hearted they are when they understand these terms. So here's a big term that some people know, but it's psychological safety. And you and I both really care about that. And what that really means to those that are listening, it's being able to be yourself without fear of any kind of reprisal, fear of I'm not going to be accepted if I make mistakes, or I can't take risks, or people don't like me, all kinds of things that come with that. So Melissa and I know that, what that means, but what does hyper adaptability have to do with AI and psychological safety? And why does this matter right now when people are learning how to implement AI?
Well, you know, we talked about before the show a little bit about hyper adaptability is, I believe, where we're headed, and that is this AI native way of operating that's really fluid, we're sensing and we're responding in a very fluid way. And quite frankly, that way of operating goes against our norms, right? Think about how we were schooled. There was a right answer, there was a wrong answer. Those people he seemed to have the right answers all the time. They got elevated. The quieter people, or maybe if when you didn't know, it felt maybe a little shameful. And it's a little bit how society runs. When we think about in the workplace, this carries through. And I feel like psychological safety is one of those terms that keeps getting talked about, but maybe there's some ambiguity on how to actually do that. And I loved your definition around it's safe to be yourself, and it's safe um, to just offer up what you're thinking without having the judgment attached. And what I'm seeing with regards to AI is what I'm calling a trifurcation. So a little bit more than a bifurcation, right? So we have those people who maybe feel safe with AI. Like I'm leaning in, I think it's exciting. I don't care if I'm making mistakes or I don't know what I'm doing. And I feel like maybe that's a group of people who's feeling psychologically safe with AI. And then there's this group of people who maybe either doesn't like it, is scared of it, they have strong feelings and they're not feeling psychologically safe with it. And then there's this third group who's maybe like begrudgingly leaning in. And maybe it's not about psychological safety, but I just, for whatever reason, am not liking it. And so I think it's a real challenge for organizations who are feeling this pressure to adopt AI and integrate AI, but they maybe need to create this sense of psychological safety in their organizations. I don't know. That's what I'm seeing,
Sure.
Judy.
I really love that you gave those three distinctive areas because as you were saying them, I was thinking I'm kind of in between the second and the third. I
Mhm.
like the experimentation, but I'm a little bit reluctant because I can't always see the benefit to it compared to what feels almost like a threat that I'm going to lose my
Mhm.
autonomy or my voice or something. So, on top of that, when you're bringing it into an organization where people may already have some fear, about the trust they have with people, or maybe feeling dominated, like it isn't safe to make mistakes. What happens when you add AI into that?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think this speaks to something I mentioned in the book, which is called your AI North Star. And without that grounding in the AI North Star, people don't really understand why we're bringing AI into the workplace. And so an organization that I feel like does this really well is Moderna. So they've established an AI North Star that says we're going to bring 15 new drugs to market in 5 years, and we're going to use AI to do it. And that's in an environment of pharmaceuticals where it typically takes 10 years to bring one drug to market. But it's an aligning function and it really communicates to everybody in the organization why we're using AI and how to filter through all the things you could be doing with AI. And I feel like that's a really grounding force to help give some of that psychological safety and align it with a purpose.
Yeah, I love that because that's how we run everything as well, is having people identify what do I want to cause in the world? And
Mhm.
then wrapping a vision that aligns with that. So it's not about what do I want to protect myself against? What do I
Mhm.
want to avoid being hurt by? But rather, what do I want to create with it? So that paints that beautiful picture of a higher vision and purpose that people could get excited about and say, okay,
Sure.
if that's what we're going to do, that could be good. That is kind of hard though, if people don't feel like one of the themes of our work here is that how do you shift that power over and power under where people are automatically already often at low trust between
Mhm.
those with quote unquote power, even though we all have power, and those perceived to not have as much power. And sometimes
Mhm.
they don't. What do you think about that? What happens when you try to add that in and you don't have those things handled? Any thoughts on that?
Well, sure. I mean, I think we're going to explore this a little bit more, but AI really starts to potentially shift the power dynamic. And I know that we talked about this notion of shifting from command and control and power over and how that will change. And I feel like the power over people a lot of time has to do with knowledge, right? I mean, we have this phrase, knowledge is power,
Mhm.
especially in a corporation, right? There's those that have the knowledge, and there's those people who feel like I don't even know what's going on, and so it's happening to me. Are you planning on these mass layoffs? And I think we have a decision to make with AI, which is, are we going to start to democratize knowledge and make more of it accessible to more people so that people can lean in and have more agency? Or are we going to continue to hoard information? And as I'm speaking about this, I want you to think about, you've got an internal corporate LLM, and you have a decision to make about what information goes into that corporate. When I say LLM, it's like a chat GPT, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And you can put as much information as you want in there, which allows people to query. And I believe the winners will be those who democratize as much information as possible in order to decentralize and to
Yes.
give the individual more and more autonomy and power.
Yeah, because it's a shared power that you're talking about, really a shared power. And I think both sides of the equation are uncomfortable with it because it's relatively unconventional. It's not mainstream to share power,
That's
even
right.
though it's what the future is requiring of us.
Mhm.
So, why do you believe that AI will force leaders to finally give up that whole power over sort of place of comfort for them?
Yeah, and I think it does have to do with this democratization of knowledge, democratization of skills. And I think you're a big proponent of a leader isn't necessarily a position. And so that is, I do feel like AI will change it because it changes who will be able to do what. And I feel like I'm a prime example of this because I just don't have the discipline to write a book. And yet, with AI, like I've always had these grand ideas, and I'm like, oh, that would be a great book. And yet, the execution side is what tripped me up. But
Right.
when I was able to use AI as a partner, and I asked it, I was like, okay, if I'm Adam Grant, who's one of my favorite authors, I'm a best-selling author. Who would I have on my team? And it would be a development editor. I didn't even know what a development editor was. I would have a research assistant, and all of a sudden, with AI, I had these virtual team members that were able to help me in supporting the book. And I feel like that's what's going to happen with leadership is they're going to have team members who rise up and are doing things that these quote unquote leaders, positional leaders, had no idea that they could do. And so now it becomes a matter of coaching individuals in unlocking and unleashing those capabilities rather than having positional authority and decision-making rights. And that's a totally different frame of mind.
I completely agree with everything you're saying. And I think what's so important about your approach to this is that you are coming at it from a we're stronger when we're collaborative than we're strong when we use the old, because you could take anything, you could take agile or AI or anything and
Mhm.
try to put it into the box of top-down
Sure.
hierarchical. And but what you lose is you lose so much initiative and so much creativity and people being willing to take those risks and make those mistakes
Mhm.
because they're afraid. And so, and I always think it's interesting that we're so aware of how employees are afraid of leaders, but we don't always think about how leaders are afraid of employees. and,
Sure.
and they have power alone
Mhm.
and together.
Yeah.
So I love what you said, though, about we have to start seeing that we cannot do as much when we're holding on to those fears, really
Mhm.
fearful ways. So I see those direct reports sometimes doing power over.
Mhm.
They often do it a little more subtly to protect themselves, like, maybe they'll do resentful compliance or they'll do rebelling and resisting, sometimes passively. So, how does AI force them to give up power over the leaders and reactivity?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and I love that you highlight that. I do feel like that same level of information hoarding can happen, at any level of the organization.
Yeah.
And I feel like so there's a little bit of the information hoarding, a little bit of the skill hoarding. I think individual contributors or people at any level can snow each other. Oh, that'd be so hard to do. I can't do that. That's going to take I remember that from my early days of the internet, and I'd go to IT with a request, and I'd ask them to bold a paragraph, or I'd ask them to replace some text. Oh, Melissa. So I feel like that type of behavior is one way that individuals can change that power dynamic. And how AI starts to change that is, again, instead of one person being able to do the things, more and more people are able to do the outputs. And so now you can create a video, you can create a podcast, you can create a blog. And so instead of focusing on being the gatekeepers of their knowledge, I think AI will force us to be facilitators of value. And we all need to be focused on the outcomes. And so, how do you, as an individual, go from it's my job to write a blog post to it's my job to make people aware of what we have going on? And
Mhm.
and however that looks, we're going to work together to make that happen. And I feel like, and I hope that shifts some people really out of the mentality of punching the clock and doing the thing to really understanding their purpose and their goals aligned with the organization and pitching in wherever they can.
Yeah, I love it because it's so aligned with what we teach as well, that it's meaningless if it's just a task. It's meaningful if it's a purpose-driven way of doing something. And also, when you're talking about it kind of forces everybody into sharing that power, I think, I know this is very much biased in what I'm going to say here, but I think that's the benefit or the value of more women coming into leadership
Mm,
because we're conditioned and we enjoy collaborating when we're at our best more, even more rapidly than a lot of men do. I think a lot of men really want that as well,
mhm,
but we are particularly wanting to use power differently. And AI in itself feels like a power game to a lot of
mhm,
people. So it's taking the fear out of that. I know this is a bit of an aside, but I did an article recently on what is success. And I sent it to my publisher at St. Louis Small Business Monthly. And he said that he was so sickened because he was at the gym and he saw this company that's very profitable already say, oh, as soon as AI is a little bit better, I'm going to fire all my employees. And he was just like, what the heck? Your company's already profitable. Why would you just destroy all these lives? And I think a lot of people are afraid of that. And
mhm.
so I don't know if you have anything to say about that. That's a little bit off
I sure
topic, but
do. I feel like it's such a toxic narrative, and it's quite frankly, I believe, not true. And I myself finished an article and it said, this narrative of slash and burn jobs lacks imagination. And we know that this is not the first evolution or revolution to have happened to society, everything from the printing press to the steam engine to electricity. And what we know to be true is that jobs change. And so, yes, the most recent example I pull from is DevOps. And for your listeners who may be like, Dev, what? This is this is the automation of the software delivery pipeline. And so the way software comes to market is you used to have somebody who did the coding, another group of people who did the testing, another set of people who was responsible for operations, so pushing it into what's called production. And there were a lot of handoffs and delays. And it was risky. It was really risky to do this. And so companies would only do it, in the early days of software, maybe once or twice a year. And then maybe, once a month, we're going to push something new into production. And what DevOps does is it takes a test first mindset, and the software developer does automate it, builds the software to the test specifications, and then it gets automatically deployed. And now the organizations that do this, that like Amazon deploys 23,000 times a day. So you can see a big difference between twice a year and 23,000 times a day.
Yes.
We've automated it, and a slew of new jobs appeared. Right now, we need people to, instead of doing the things, they're building, monitoring, and maintaining these automations. And so
Yeah, and
that's just a
I,
small
I,
slice of like how that starts to look.
I wish people could grasp this concept. I'm going to try to see if I can make it even simpler for anybody that isn't in software engineering, because I look at it as if you were building a house and you
Hmm.
had everybody cross-functioning within the building of that house and building little pieces of it simultaneously and making sure that somebody's bringing in the owners to make sure that it's exactly what they're envisioning,
There you go.
so that you don't have the
Mhm.
whole house built and then you don't, and it wasn't what they wanted. And so that's the simplicity of it, is all business is technology, even McDonald's, and so we're familiar with technology, but we don't always understand what goes into building it. And
Mhm.
so having an assistant in AI is very important. So we can't afford to be afraid of AI, and as the leaders or as the frontline staff, really. So, you like us want to take hierarchies away and go to these collaborative dynamic networks.
Mhm.
So that's what I mean when I say shifting power until it's shared power. And
Yeah.
and it's very much like our responsibility-based model that we call, it's also aligned with where organizational development is going into teal organizations. So why do you say that rigid and traditional top-down hierarchies and
Mhm.
AI are conflictual with each other? Why would you say that?
Yeah, I think it really boils down to, in part, I'm sure there's a lot more to it, but in part to the speed differential. And I've got this analogy in my head, and we'll test it out here and see if it flies. You know how that sometimes these go. But I'm thinking of somebody who's walking through a city from point A to point B. And let's just say that they have the support team, which is the rest of the organization, helping them navigate through this city. In an advanced team might spot a pothole or a curb, and they have time to communicate it through the layers back to the person walking. And maybe there's a road construction ahead, and they have time to think through the alternatives and discuss and debate and reroute. And at the speed of walking, there's really time for this to happen. Um, Now let's think of that same person, and they're running a 100-meter dash, right? They're on a track and they're running a 100-meter dash. And now there's no types. There's no time for these types of things, right? Like for all the information to go through the layers, like the information needs to be processed much, much more quickly and being sent directly to the person so that they can adjust on the fly. And I feel like that is the primary reason why these these hierarchies have to go by the wayside in favor of these more dynamic networks where we can get the information uh, to the right person at the right time and from the person to the right other person as quickly as possible. And those organizations that figure that out are the ones that are going to win.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. You use the example of walking to running. I would almost say speed of change. That's a term that sometimes scares people. What do you mean speed of change? Well, change is happening faster.
Yeah.
And the speed of change is more like somebody driving by on a motorcycle.
Yeah.
And we really do, it's not efficient to keep that whole I gotta wait until I'm told what to do kind of mindset, or I've got to
Hmm.
spend all my energy telling people what to do. When
Yeah.
if you give them the outcomes and you give them the tools like AI and Agile,
Mhm.
then they can then step up to that shared power model willingly. And I think they enjoy it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So a lot of times I see even in Agile, and I'm sure it's happening in AI, where sometimes the top leaders are kind of just pushing it off onto others within the
Mhm.
organization. And when they don't have the understanding of what happens in those dynamic networks, I
Hmm.
think that's another big problem, is that disconnect. Do you have that happening in the AI world right now?
Well, sure. And a little bit of what I'm hearing there is what I call passive versus active sponsorship. And so we talked about this notion of what needs to shift culturally. And I think that's one of those things that needs to change is you can't just do this hand wave. And what I see going on in organizations is the board is like, what are you guys doing around AI? And then that trickles down to the C-suite, and the C-suite says, to their direct reports, hey, what are you guys doing around AI? And there's this abdication because nobody really knows what to do. It's so
Mhm.
new.
Mhm.
And we just
Yeah.
keep pushing it down to a level where we hope somebody knows what they're supposed to do. And and now we've got team members who are being told, go learn AI. But again, they're lacking that context, they're lacking that North Star. And so, I just see this vicious cycle where the frontline people are being told to go do something with AI. They don't really know what to do and how to align it to business. And then the leaders are disappointed in the results.
You know what? It's so interesting because I think that is the biggest crux of almost any initiative.
That's good.
Even when I talk about AI, because people need to be understanding all of this at the same time, a simultaneous learning. That's why
Hmm.
when we took our model into school reform, for example, we made sure that not only were the parents or the teachers learning all these new skills and tools to help understand and be effective with the students, but the students were learning it so that they could redirect the negative behavior in their parents and teachers, for example.
Yeah.
So it's but for some reason it seems like when people have a title, a
Hmm.
lot of times they feel intimidated about sharing knowledge because if they or looking like they don't already have it.
Hmm.
And then when they delegate it down, they really don't already have it. And then the people on the front line are intimidated by the leaders because they think they're supposed to already have it. Because the
Right.
expectation is like, no, you figure it out. No, you figure it out.
Yeah.
And and I just think that is really true what you're saying.
Hmm.
Your work is really positioning AI as a coworker or a partner, but we actually don't even see that in most companies. Leaders are partnering with frontline staff, for example, or mid-level managers. So it's a lack of co-working, really.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like this just circles back to the introduction where we talked about psychological safety. Like it's not safe just to sit there and be like, look, we don't know what's going on. We don't expect you to know what's going on, but hey, maybe we can figure it out together.
Yeah, and let's put all of our fears on the table, but let's put all of our excitement on the table. And one of the things that I was starting to say is the article I want to write is about how really beautiful shared power does work. But even in
Mhm.
our own country, we don't see it working all that great. When we talk about democratizing, it's almost got a bad rap right now because
Mhm.
we haven't known how to catch up to having trustworthy conversations, being able to be clear without fears with each other. It's like, you're right, it's like a vicious cycle. But when we do it well, it is so rich. And I think
Mhm.
that's probably, is that not why you are driven to want to help people understand the adaptiveness that needs to occur?
Yeah,
Is
for sure. Yeah, I mean, I like to say you can't expect 21st century results with a 20th century operating model.
right.
And, we just haven't had that forcing function to overhaul it, and overhauling things in flight is very, very difficult. And
Hmm.
so, for whatever reason, I had this aha moment and I thought, okay, I think I've got enough foundation where I can see a path forward for organizations to incrementally and iteratively move from this linear organization that they have into this hyper adaptive future. And I feel like I like to say change happens in earthquake and erosions, right? It's either like dramatic and sudden and everybody's crying and nobody knows what's going on, or it happens like very, very gradually and subtly, which is much more palatable, but more difficult to achieve. And so really that's what I'm after though, is how do we gradually shift into this place that makes sense without making it feel like everybody's lives are on the line.
Yeah, it's kind of abstract to a lot of people. Like even when I heard you say we want to help them be able to build simultaneously and iteratively and get out of this linear path, a lot of people are like, "What?"
Yeah.
But what it really means is it's kind of like saying we're moving from building a rough primitive log cabin to building a much more complicated structure. And not only are we not having one person do one thing at a time, which is
Mhm.
linear, we're helping them to build things in a at the same time. Oh, you work on the
Mhm.
bathroom, I'll work on the kitchen, I'll work on the plumbing, you work on the electrical. And I just think that is why people feel they probably feel stupid. Like, I don't know how to figure all this out anyway. And now you're adding another thing in the mix.
Yeah, and the best organizations, I know we wanted to talk about democratizing skills and the best organizations. I'm going to pull on Mercedes-Benz right now, and they've got this really interesting program that they call D-Shift, and it's this understanding that roles are going to change, and people who understand data have a competitive advantage in the organization. And so what they've done is they've actually taken people who are on the factory floor and assembling Mercedes-Benz, and they said, we think there's value in cross-pollinating and cross-training these individuals in data. And we're going to make them data specialists and teach them how to work with data and manipulate data. And they're going to take that knowledge back to the factory floor and evolve operations there. And so leading organizations, FedEx has citizens coders, Toyota's doing something similar where they've got people on the factory floor who are building AI agents. Understand that this upskilling and this reskilling starts to really empower the whole organization. And it's the underpinning of it is that we've hired good people.
Mhm.
And I love that point of view. We've hired good people, so let's bring them along for the ride and let's empower them because they've got years, if not decades, of experience specializing in this area of the business. And we just need to unlock some of those capabilities.
Yeah, yeah. What I love about what you're saying by the cross-pollination, and that's what we do as well, but we do it around
Mm,
the human systems, is it gives everybody a common language. It gives everybody a feeling of I'm not excluded from the keepers of the knowledge. Everybody's getting the same knowledge. They're being respected for their ability to see the connections, to be able to
yeah,
see the bigger picture, not just go put the cap on the toothpaste and that's you don't have to worry about anything else, which robs people of a sense of meaningfulness, I think
yeah.
meaningfulness, and it reminds me a little bit of also when you move from having like, um, I guess a rotary phone to a cell phone, at first it all feels, oh, I don't even know how to program this thing, but then we wouldn't do without them if we start to really understand the benefit. So, and then you said we like to think of people as being smart or something. What did you say? The
Just
ideas
that we've hired good people.
we've hired
Yeah.
good people. Yeah, we
Uh,
we have a saying, people are great, and if they're not acting great, it's a system problem.
sure.
Not usually the person. Once in a while it can be if they're very sociopathic or something. But yeah, so I don't know if this fits in anywhere, but I remember you talking about a practical tool you call focus framework. Is that
Mhm.
tied with what we're saying? Or is that
Yeah, so
totally
the
separate?
Yeah, I feel like the focus framework is a great example of that local empowerment with guardrails. So what we're trying to do in this hyperadaptive organization is unlock everybody in the front lines. So focus is just a mnemonic and it stands for fit. It's a way of analyzing or evaluating AI use cases. Because what we know to be true with AI is the use cases seem endless, right? You can do it everything from recipe planning to therapy. And so how do you boil that down and distill it to make sure that your use cases align with the hopefully predefined AI North Star? And so we start with the F, which is the fit. Does it fit with our strategic goal? And then we look at organizational pull, which is the O. Is there internal demand for this? So if we spend the time to explore this side of AI, this AI use case, will people actually use it, or is it just a shiny object? The C is capability readiness. So do we have the capability to build this agent? I've talked to organizations and some of them might say like, oh, we want to automate our entire content delivery pipeline. but they don't have the capabilities to actually do that. And so the U is underlying data. Do we have the data to support this AI? Do we have, again, if we were looking at content, do we have all of our blog posts digitized so that we could put them into an LLM, so that we could pull on them and automate some of that? And then the S is success metrics. And I find that it's so easy to go and build, and then somebody asks you, well, what impact does that have? And you don't know. And so what the focus framework does is it says up front, let's figure out what we're measuring and why we're measuring it.
Yeah.
And then if we put this in the hands of individuals, along with, I'm going to use the Moderna example again. We've got our AI North Star. We're trying to do these 15 drugs in 5 years. Now I'm in my little section of the business, and I'm trying to evaluate these AI use cases. I'm able to do that without submitting them to my manager for approval
Yeah.
and then having it go up the chain. Because what I've seen, I was just talking to one organization, and they said, Melissa, we have 5,000 of these use cases that we are trying to evaluate, and we are the bottleneck. And so this is, to put it in your language, it's building that power between by allowing groups to collaborate on identifying these high value quick wins.
Yeah, it's so interesting because the words you're using, like for those that maybe aren't all familiar with what use cases, if you go back to my building analogy and you're building a home, your use case might be, I want a room big enough to have huge gatherings, or I want a TV room, or I want a pool table room or something. Those are use cases in that example. But when you're running a business, you need to know what is the priority, because AI can do so much. It's like when people used to go to marketing and they'd say, well, don't make everybody your customer because that's too hard. It's too diluted. And so it sounds like focus. I did not catch what the O was for.
Is organizational pull.
Oh,
So is there
organizational pull.
demand? Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Because what I see in this is there the pull forward, is it the fit, has almost to do with the higher level purpose of the organization, like getting those 5 new drugs in 5 years or whatever it was. So if people don't feel that tie to the meaningful, then they're like, this is just some kind of mechanical thing that I have to learn. They
Yeah,
don't
that's
really,
right.
they don't see, it's like when NASA had to help people all grab on to, we're going to put a man on the moon. And then what I hear you saying is that once you understand that's the priority, or those are the priorities, then you're able to help people keep tying back to that meaningfulness and how all those parts work together. Is that an accurate way to say what focus
Yeah,
is?
I love that you're translating it into just everyday language, which is the first two is it aligned to what we're trying to do? Is it aligned to our purpose? The second two letters are really, can we pull this off? Do we have what we need to
Yes.
actually pull this off? And then the last one is, can we measure the impact?
Yeah, and is our vision aligned with, is everything in alignment? So
Yeah.
that, because otherwise you're just jumping in and not knowing exactly what you're building or why you're building it, which is kind of difficult to sustain the oomph behind, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, I call it the random acts of AI. People are just out there and they're just dinking around. Oh, I used it to answer my email. That's great. How did that move the organization forward?
Exactly. It's that higher level thinking of the bigger puzzle that you need to
hmm
know what's the priority and how do we segment it so certain people are working on that priority while someone
That's
else is working over here. And that's
hmm
what people are not used to realizing, how necessary the collaboration has to be. And
hmm
that focus tool sounds like it would help define, almost like an architect defines a building with a blueprint. It's almost like focus helps them define some kind of structure around what to prioritize. Would that be
Yeah,
safe to say?
yeah, for sure. I mean, it's in the mnemonic, right? Like we're helping people focus their efforts around AI so that it's not just like not so it's aligned to meaning. It's aligned to meaning, it's aligned to purpose.
Yeah, yeah. So have you been, when you take this model of adaptability in hyper adaptability, what are some of the biggest challenges you have in bringing that forward, whether it's with the leaders or with the frontline staff or the mid-level people? What do you
hmm
run into?
Well, I feel like one is it's a brand new model, right? So there isn't a ton of field experience behind it. What I've done is I've surfaced the research and the patterns from the past. And I've surfaced the what the leading organizations are doing. And we're just in the process now of field testing a lot of this. What I'm seeing is two things. One is organizations are just waking up to the fact that they need to support AI rollout and AI transformation. I feel like what's happened up until now has been kind of the hand wave and go play and, a little bit of spray and pray AI and maybe something magical will happen. And so what the model really does is it says, hey, there's a more structured way to approach this. We're going to have to spin up some support structures. In the book, I talk about these AI activation hubs and the AI impact hub in order to support the humans through this transition and to support the reinvention of workflows. And so organizations are just starting to wake up to it. And so part of it is helping them see what needs to happen. And then we've got to get aligned around that, which is a whole other thing. So part of the work to be done is getting executive alignment around, okay, now that we know that a framework exists or a model exists, now do we agree that that's something that makes sense in our organization? And then we've got to start to budget for it and plan for it and spin these support structures up. So there's a fair amount of work that needs to be done around this
Yes.
whole transformation.
Yeah, and it's just one of the pieces of the transformation. The technology itself is one piece of it. And that's also new for people to realize that if we don't have the culture right, for example, we fail a
Mhm.
lot of these projects. And so there's the psychological readiness, there's the physical readiness, there's the intellectual readiness, there's the who does what procedurally. Um,
Mhm.
so that you have your goals, procedures, and roles lined up with these bigger initiative or guidance of focus. But I think you're also saying because this is so new, people don't even know what they don't know or what they need to know and how they need to know it and with whom do they need to know it.
Well, sure. Yeah. I like to say there's the technical side of AI, which is building the AI solutions. And then there's the people side, which is the people, processes, roles, and culture. And like you're saying, just that awareness, like, oh, there's a technical side and then there's a people side. That's an aha moment. And then there's the ownership question. People don't know internally, is this an IT thing? Is this an HR thing? Is this a new AI transformation thing? And
Yeah.
those are the conversations that I feel like are happening right now. And those are some of the blockers to really moving things forward.
Is that part of that five-stage integration journey you were talking about? What
That's
you're
right.
describing here?
Yeah.
Could you
And so
could you
there's,
tell us a little bit more so we can hear it sequentially, even though we're such linear thinkers?
yeah.
It might be all simultaneous. I don't know.
I appreciate that. And it's a little bit to hold in your head all at once, but I think when you hear the stages, they start to make sense. Stage one is really foundations. So do we have dynamic AI governance? Have we identified some early champions? Do we have foundations in place? Before we move into stage two, which is where we really start to look at our processes and we say, okay, here's how our processes exist today. How do we inject AI into those processes? Can we use it for our meeting agendas? Can we use it to summarize our meetings? And I use that because I know it's a relatable example.
Mhm.
And in stage two, we start to spin up what I call AI activation hubs, which is a network of internal hubs to support this activity. And now we start to take a programmatic approach to supporting the injection of AI into our workflows. Stage three, on a small scale, we start to take a look at what happens when we automate these workflows. And we start to really use agentic AI in a powerful way. And in stage three, we fire up what I call the AI Impact Hub. And that says, as we automate our workflows, we know that we shift from doing the tasks to building, monitoring, and maintaining the automations. And so, what impact does that have on our humans? How are jobs being rewired? And we start to get a handle on that in a small scale before we start to ramp that up in stage four And stage 4 is when we also start to ramp up organization around value streams. And so the hierarchy starts to move into more of a specialist role where you might have a few high-powered specialists around marketing or finance to service your value streams, but you're not segmented by the hierarchy. Like that becomes less and less in stage 4. And then in stage 5, we've got orchestrated value streams. And by stage 5, we're primarily organized around value streams. We've got AI dynamically funding those value streams. We have the remnants of the hierarchy, and we have a stability layer that's dealing with, keeping the lights on, keeping the power going, making sure the servers are running. And so those are really in stage 5, the 3 layers of the organization.
It so makes sense because it's almost like raising a child. You have to build the foundation. You have to make sure that you've taught them all these different processes for being a good citizen. And then you put it in kind of a testing the impact by letting them out into the world to make mistakes and to do things well. And then value streams are them starting to adopt a whole philosophy of living and then orchestrating living a life through all of those values. Maybe it's a little rocky, this analogy I'm using, but that's what it feels like. It feels like raising a healthy citizen is very similar to raising a healthy project or raising a healthy initiative. And you
Yeah.
can't go through it skipping any of those stages.
Well, and what I hear you saying is like there's a linear kind of this horizontal viewpoint. When we're thinking about life, we don't necessarily think like, well, I'm going to think about my finances now, and I'm just going to think about them not in relation to anything else. And
Yes.
that's what our organizations do, and it just hasn't made sense for a while.
No. And it does cause an artificial separation, even amongst the different disciplines in the organization and the
Mhm.
different roles, because now it's I'm doing my thing instead of how are we doing our thing together and how does all the pieces fit? And I think that's probably a challenge you have because not everybody's a systems thinker that pictures the
Mhm.
entire puzzle. They're just kind of used to heads down.
Sure.
So when you think about the hyperadaptive model, I love to ask questions like this. What would it look like if an AI native organization was really fully embracing all the concepts of hyperadaptiveness? What would win-win-win look like? And we say
Yeah.
win-win-win because win-win is sometimes thought of as almost a compromise, where
Mhm.
win-win-win is something beyond this way or this way. It might even be a third option. In your way of looking at it, I think it's also around how does everybody in the organization have a win? That would also be win-win-win. How do you have the executives, the middle managers, the frontline staff all feeling like this has helped us?
Yeah, and I'd like to answer this on 2 levels. One is the people that you identified, right? The executives, the middle and the front line. And then I'd like to take a different lens that I'll talk about after that. So I feel like the win-win-win for the people you identified, the executives have a resilient enterprise that can sense market shifts ahead of the competition, right? And they get that of, oh, we're leading an organization that's really innovative and can be hyper adaptive. Those in the middle, I feel like there's this entire layer of these large organizations that have become the nagging police, is what I call them. Like they're like, hey, did you
Mm.
get this done? Did you get that done? Like, how are we on this one? And they're busy like creating PowerPoints up for executives, and then they're like, tapping people on the shoulder who and like nobody goes to school to become the nagging police. Like that's
No,
just
it's never good for the student if you did, because then
yeah,
they don't become responsible. And now
yeah.
you the manager is holding all the responsibility for whether I even complete something, which is it's not a very healthy.
Yeah, so the win for them is now they get to really focus on human alignment. Are we doing the right work? Is it aligned to strategy? And I don't care how much AI there is, there's still decisions to be made. And in fact, I posit that there's even more decisions to be made because AI expands the number of possibilities. And so now we need to, it's expanded, it's diverged. Now we need to converge on what's important. So I feel
Yeah.
like that's the win for the middle. And then the front line gets to gain democratized skills and get to do more cool things without that soul-crushing drudgery
Yeah.
that that like I think it's part of that soul-crushing drudgery that causes people to check out and just punch the clock. And
Yeah.
so if we have less of that and more work aligned to purpose, isn't that kind of a cool place to be?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I think that's why people would then stay.
Hmm.
And they would start really showing up, and then the company would all of a sudden have all these new things to announce because their people are so comfortable being free to be themselves. I just love that idea. And I explain a little bit more about how would the executives gain that sense of I can see what can be done in a way that they can communicate it. Is that ever an issue? Just making sure that what they're learning, their hyper adaptiveness is being communicated all the way through like a through line. Does that happen?
Yeah, maybe I need a little clarification. What is it that you're envisioning?
Well, when you talked about the executives, you talked
Hmm.
about them having what hyper adaptive, what the win would be for them. So
Hmm.
if I understood you right, the win for them is them seeing all the things that they could use AI for from a business use case. Is that
Mm.
what you're saying?
I think it was a little different. It was,
Okay.
this notion of, I think having a the words I use were a resilient enterprise, right? That senses market shifts ahead of the competition. And I think why that's a win for the executives is on the execution side of that. Because I feel like what happens now is one, executives are charged with sense making, which sometimes is difficult to do. So one, AI will help them with the sense making, but two, it will help them be able to communicate that internally and for that to actually happen. What happens now is even if executives see where things need to go, oftentimes because of the handoffs in the hierarchy, they don't know if that strategy is actually being executed on the front lines.
You know what? That's exactly what I was trying to communicate
Okay.
because what I was thinking is that the executives, they're making sense, they're sense
Hmm.
making. I love that phrase. And they're trying to find a way to effectively communicate it.
Hmm.
That's what I was asking. Isn't there problems with the handoff? And you're saying, yeah, there is. But once you get that corrected, the win-win-win is that they now are sense making and they do know how to do that. Is that
That's
what
right.
you're
Yeah.
picturing? Okay.
Uh-huh.
That makes sense. So it's not like you have to come up with how they're doing it in this moment. It's just that would be what the vision would be for win-win, that
That's
they would
right.
know how to use it
Hmm.
that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
It does require that people get out of their comfort zone because they've had so many centuries of it's always been done this way. And
Hmm.
I think we're kind of behind the curve when it comes to developing the human beings to even think this way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. You brought women into the equation earlier in the conversation,
Mhm.
and I now keep seeing that percolating up. I'm part of a women in AI group, but even in non-women groups, I see this understanding that maybe women are better suited, more suited, have a mindset that's more aligned with AI. Now, when I see who's getting funded and I see, what AI initiatives are getting funded, I feel like, oh, that feels still like a male power dynamic. But I'll be interested to keep an eye on that phenomenon, this phenomenon that women are well suited in the age of AI as the years go by.
I think agile and AI and all kinds of things. And I do think both of those things are happening simultaneously. You have the more shared power models, they just make sense. They fit with where the technology is all moving. But then you still have people kind of holding on with a death grip to
Mhm.
kind of the win-lose way of operating. So with that in mind, what would be the best advice or words of wisdom that you would like to leave our audience with? Thinking about I mean, our audience could be anyone from a college student getting ready to go out
Mhm.
into the work world, which they probably
Yeah.
already know AI a ton,
Yeah.
or that person, all the way through.
Yeah. I would say, just maybe keep an open mind that the structures, whether it be an organizational structure or the power structure, is ripe for disrupting. And if you don't fear the technology, fear the rigid structures that are preventing you from manifesting your best self and what you could now do that you couldn't do before. Whether that be climate change, whether that be, making an amazing movie, whatever it is that you feel passionate about solving, like the keys, you've gotten a new set of keys to unlock some new doors and see what you can do with it. And understand that maybe the way you learned isn't, hierarchically needs to change, and embrace it.
Love it. Embrace that change, welcome the disruption, recognize that rigidity is what's making your life miserable. Really, it is.
Yeah.
That's why we changed our name to LifeWorks Systems. Our parent company is called Expanding Human Potential. Because if you don't understand how to let go of one system, because this other one's going to do way more for you, then you're,
For sure.
so I love it that is an encouragement to them to do that. And it just so fits with how essential it is. I want to thank you for being part of a program that's about hyperadaptivity and how essential it is to create this world where we have win-win. Because our mission is to create a world where people love their lives, and you can't create a world if you don't have a system. So thank you.
Amen. Well, Judy, it's been such a pleasure to have a conversation like this. Really love and support the work you're doing, and been a pleasure to be on the show.
Back at you. You've been listening to When Everyone Wins, where we're shifting power over and under to power within and between. I'm Judy Ryan, your Transformation Talk Radio host. Tune in each second and fourth Monday at 9 a.m. Pacific time to learn new concepts and tools and listen to conversations I have with thought leaders and change agents. You'll also see real-world applications of what I'm covering so that you experience the power of the concepts and tools I share. In each episode, I bring you my knowledge from decades in workplace culture transformation and leadership development as the founder and CEO of LifeWorks Systems. I invite you to call in with your unique stories and questions. The path to ensure that everyone wins depends on our ability as people to create a life we love and help others do the same. For more information, visit lifeworksystems.com.